Yo, what is up everyone, back here with another video. In today's video, we are going to be doing a team building guide where I go and take you through all the steps of building a team in competitive Pokemon. If you guys enjoy this kind of video, make sure to let me know, like, subscribe, comment below what you enjoyed about the video, what you want to see from me coming in the future. And once again, guys, as always, like, I appreciate the support. I just want to say thank you ahead of time. It's been absolutely incredible with the Scarlet Violet release, how much support the channel's gotten. So I just want to say thank you for that. Anyways, without further ado, we're going to get right into it. So team building is very, it's a very intricate, like kind of system, but what I'm going to do here is try and simplify it down into a certain couple different ways that kind of help you structure your building and your thoughts well, right? So there are a couple different factors that go into building, right? So first off is kind of roles, right? So this is basically what kind of roles Pokemon are going to fill on your team, how they are going to, support your team, support your Mons, and like basically how you utilize certain options on a team, right? So first off with roles is basically going to be, I'm just going to list a couple of roles here that normally a team would include, right? Redirection, damage reduction. And you look over here, we have speed control, weather. We have pivoting. This is usually just a subcategory. Basically, this kind of entails within like some other things. And then you can look at this almost for disruption. This counts as like stuff like fake out, thunder wave, those kind of moves, and then finally set up, right? These are kind of the main pillars for things that you'll see on a competitive team, right? So let's even take a look at like one of the matches here going on in this VGC tournament, right? So let's look at one of these teams, okay? So if we look at this person's team over here, they have a Moongus, right? So this is their redirection, right? A Moongus. They have damage reduction. What is that? That's Arcanine. That's another support. They have speed control. What is that? It could technically be Fluttermane because Fluttermane gets Trick Room. Not, they're probably could use better, control there. For pivoting, right? They're relying more on swaps, so that's not something they have. For disruption, Amoonguss also fits within that category. And for setup, Dragonite would fit within that category as well, assuming that they have some type of setup there, right? So you can kind of see how teams will definitely spread out between these categories and kind of build on these concepts, right? The final category actually that I want to talk about that's also included on this team is breakers. So basically breakers are, am I streaming and recording? Oh, there we go. So basically, so I had Stream Live, which is really funny, but Twitch will never see it. But it was still marking me as streaming, which is really funny. But yeah, anyways, so going into, I just rated someone, so that's why I was like funny that I forgot to end stream. But anyways, so basically set up, and then you have built like pretty much breakers, and breakers are your main source of damage dealing, right? Breakers are essentially made like they're on your team to deal damage, right? So what I'm gonna do is now split up these categories, and I'm gonna give you guys some examples of these, so you guys can kind of get a better context of how they work within the metagame, right? So first off, we're going to think about redirection, right? What are some good Pokemon for redirection? Pokemon that redirect, right? We have, I'm also going to get out of this thing and go back into the builder. Pokemon redirect, Amoonguss, right? We have Volcarona. We have Mousehold. We have DDF, right? DDF. We have, let's even factor in like some of the other rare ones that you see. I mean, technically Bourbonnet's not rare, but it's in there, right? So let's go through the Rage Powder. Rage Powder. We don't see any others that matter. Okay, good. And then we look over here, follow me. And DD was the other one we mentioned. Technically, I'm going to mention Pachirisu. I don't know how good it is, but it is in the deck, so it's worth noting. And basically, like, what these Pokemon are aiming to do is to protect other Pokemon on your team. So these Pokemon operate in a way where they enable their partners, and utilize their redirection to help advance your goal through the Pokemon they are supporting, right? So some strategies you'll notice, like in a lead, sometimes certain teams will have like an attacker plus like redirection, or they'll have setup plus redirection. That's the main intention of that and how they're using it, right? And that's kind of what they're going for. All right, damage reduction. So damage reduction, first I'm going to put Pokemon that reduce damage, right? So these are Pokemon that are going to be used to actually slow down opponents' teams, right? So these are Pokemon that you would think of as, you know, intimidators, you know, setting screens, a bunch of stuff. So a couple of examples here: Arcanine, Screamtail, Gyarados. We can continue down the list. Grimmsnarl, right? These kind of Pokemon are Pokemon that are going to be reducing damage and being really annoying to opponents, right? And we could do some examples of these damage reduction options. I'm also technically going to put in the Ting-Lu and Wo-Chien. Ting-Lu, Wo-Chien. And example of these damage reduction options are, like, for example, Tablets of Ruin, right? Of Ruin. Vessel of Ruin, sorry. Then we have, what's it called? Light Screen, Reflect, Will-O-Wisp. We have Intimidate, right? We have basically a bunch of other options that you can go into. Aurora Veil, right? These are all options that are basically going to be disruptive to the opponent and reducing their damage. And typically, like, most consistent teams will have this. Now, there are some teams that opt not to really focus on damage reduction, focus on more offensive stuff. And that's something that, you know, you obviously measure based on what your preferences are and how you want to build your team out, right? So next up is Speed Control. So Speed Control, you know, this is a Pokemon that can influence the game through speed tiers, right? Speed tiers, speed tier manipulation, I should say. Manipulation, forcing a different turn order, or slowing down the opponents over time with damage slash moves slash status, right? So some examples of, you know, speed control, right? We have Tailwind, we have Thunder Wave, we have Icy Wind, we have Trick Room. These are your main, like, ones that you would think of. Electroweb, right? Nuzzle. These kind of options are ones that are going to be really annoying for opponents to deal with, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be pressuring them consistently, right? Okay, weather. So weather is actually one that is incredibly, you know, weather is one that's incredibly interesting because it's changed a little bit over time, but typically it's Pokemon that can influence the game, right? Influence the game through weather effects. Weather effects. I'm going to actually move us down a little bit so you guys can see this. Through weather effects, impacting or boosting certain damage or Pokemon that utilize the weather, right? And some examples of these Pokemon are just like Tyranitar, Torkoal, you know, obviously too, this matters a lot for the photosynthesis mons, which is why weather is, like, more important here. Abomasnow, and then you have Pelipper as your rain setter, right? So this is kind of something that is used by a lot of these Pokemon and something that you can include on certain teams or even build a team around, right? Then you have pivoting, which is like a subcategory basically. So this category pretty much just filters in moves like Parting Shot, U-Turn, right? You know, those kind of pivoting moves, Flip Turn. This is just moves that give you, like, flexibility. And that's kind of what they're used for. That's pretty much it. All right, Disruption. So this factors in with stuff like Spore, Thunder Wave, basically stuff that can prevent a turn from going through that your opponent otherwise would want to go through. So Spore, Thunder Wave, Fake Out, that's a few of them. Quick Guard, Wide Guard, basically things that are just stopping the opponent from getting the value out of their turn that they want to. Finally, Setup. So Setup is something that, like, Pokemon that establish themselves, right? That establish themselves as a threat through setup and with good support, being able to sweep through the opponents once in a proper position, right? And then finally we have some breakers, right? So breakers are Pokemon that are focused on doing more damage immediately. I would recommend writing down notes if you guys would like to. I will have a transcript of this up on Patreon as well, if you guys are interested in getting access to this transcript, along with, you know, obviously, what's it called? The teams I use and all that stuff. It is up on Patreon. I do post team guides all the time whenever I post, you know, teams up there for the Elite Four and Champion level patrons. And for the first level patrons, you get access to my teams. This is the kind of stuff that you'll be seeing when you're there. So Yeah, anyways. So breakers, Pokemon that are doing more damage immediately, exerting immediate pressure on the opponent, right? So basically, you're kind of seeing like how these would all come together. Now, the roles aren't the only thing that you need to kind of fill out a team. There's going to be more things that go into it. It's just one of the different factors that can go into it, right? So now we're going to move on to cores, right? What are cores? Cores are something that's brought up a lot in team building, and people don't really sometimes understand how it works. So I actually saw a core while I was playing on stream earlier, and it was just on ladder. My opponent had a team of Chien-Pao, right? Talonflame, and Garchomp, right? And the way the team was designed was actually very smart. So pretty much what you do is you have a core of Garchomp and Talonflame. You lead Talonflame next to Chomp. You go for a Tailwind. You go for Earthquakes, Terra Ground Earthquakes specifically. You can go for Rock Slides. You can go for a bunch of immediate damage. And even if your opponent intimidates you, what you can do is you can swap in Chien-Pao, which lowers defense stats of other active Pokemon. And this benefits Garchomp, especially if it's clicking Earthquake and Chien-Pao is just protecting. As well, it can Earthquake freely next to Talonflame, right? So this just basically makes Garchomp less susceptible to Intimidate, right? And these are like just some small factors that will like go into team building, right? Now, obviously, as well, this is just one example of many different cores, but this is kind of an idea of like how the cores are constructed. So pretty much you'll see that it was built with the idea, I want Garchomp to Terra, I want it to be able to spam Earthquake, I want to get speed control with it to immediately deal damage, and I want to support it even when it gets intimidated. And that's kind of how the team was constructed, right? And you can almost see this even with like certain gimmick teams, right? Or like, I guess you call it gimmick teams, but like it depends. Like, I don't think Dondozo Tatsugiri is going to be a super consistent high level team, but these two, right, like they're built a certain way to support the strategy, right? The Dondozo needs a specific Terrestrialize, and then they have certain Pokemon in the back that you can utilize to pressure opposing slots and not necessarily have to lead Dondozo and Tatsugiri, because if you just lead them together, you're going to get bodied a lot of the time by the opponent because they're going to be ready. It's like leading Geomancy Xerneas and just clicking Geomancy. It doesn't work, right? Because your opponent knows that you're just going to Geomancy and they're going to counter you. So that's kind of the main thing that comes into play with cores, right? So cores are basically a group of Pokemon focused on highlighting each other's strengths, and synergizing in a way which allows all Pokemon to perform their best to advance the game, or slow down the opponent's game plan in your favor, right? And you can even see this on balance compositions, right? So like, let's say we have an Arcanine, right, and a Moongus, and then we have, you know, I mean, we could even say like, I'll just say Iron Jugulus for this example, or Iron Jugulus, whatever it's called, right? And then like a Great Tusk. I actually built a team around this, which is up on Patreon. But pretty much the way the team was built is you have the Tailwind, you have the Earthquake mode, and then what you can do is you can swap in Intimidate, and then you also have a Moongus, which helps with Trick Room, because then you could spore things in Trick Room, right? That's just an example of things. And overall, what this provides is it starts giving the team a little bit more substance in terms of what it can do. And obviously, there's going to be two more Pokemon that fix the other problems. But basically, this core is meant to be strung against a decent variety of teams and kind of synergize with each other. So a core that I really like, that I favored a lot in my building, has been a Moongus Arcanine as well. But it's had Roaring Moon and Fluttermane. And the reason why is for the next thing that I'm about to get into, which is typing. So Fluttermane, right? Fluttermane and Roaring Moon, right? These are my, like, this is like one of my favorite cores in the format right now, right? So pretty much the way these pairs are designed is they complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. Now you might look at this and be like, okay, so where are the cores? So I'm going to go over some basic cores with you guys, or not cores, like typing cores, basically like typing synergy, right? And these are types that work well together. First off is Fire, Water, Grass, right? And then it's Fairy, Dragon, Steel. They all cover each other pretty well. So what I did is I was like, okay, I really like those cores. I want to implement it into a small core, and I want to make sure I'm balancing out my special attackers and physical attackers. So I'm going to use Fluttermane, I'm going to use Roaring Moon, I'm going to use Arcanine, I'm going to use a Moongus, right? So what I have, let's just flesh out this core, right? Obviously the full team with EVs, you know, you can see in the link down below. I don't want to keep talking about Patreon, but that's like where you will find the full stuff for this. I'm just trying to explain it in a way that will make sense. You have Crunch, Dragon Claw, right? You have Iron Head, you have U-Turn, right? And then over here, you have Shadow Ball, you have Dazzling Gleam, you have Trick Room, you have Protect, Trick Room, Protect, Sash. Go over here, you have Arcanine, Flare Blitz, Will-O-Wisp, Snarl, Protect. You have a Mago Berry, for example, right? And then you have a Moongus with the Citrus Berry, you have Clear Smog, Rage Powder, Giga Drain, and Spore, right? Okay, so now we're going to look at this team and kind of explain where the synergy comes about. So pretty much between the Amoonguss and Arcanine, we have not filled out the final water type of the typing core, but with a little bit of ingenuity and messing around with Roaring Moon and Flutter Mane strengths and weaknesses, I decided to give the band a Roaring Moon a steel type terrestrialization. And this is where terrestrializing really comes into play in making your team building more flexible. Before, I would have to include a steel type to have the Fairy Dragon Steel Core, but now I can automatically just put a steel type on my Roaring Moon and utilize that to really disrupt my opponent and be annoying for them, right? And it can create a better defensive core for that reason. So now, if I have a really good swap with Roaring Moon for Arcanine, so let's say I call the opponent's play and I swap in on a water move with Roaring Moon, then my opponent brings in something that can normally pressure Roaring Moon. Instead of being forced to swap back into Arcanine, now I can turn into a Steel type and just go for an Iron Head, right? And that kind of gives me a lot of options in terms of what I can do in terms of damage and just how I'm playing the game, right? Now, Flutter Mane, right, obviously complements Salamence in the way of its physical versus special split, which is the next thing I want to talk about. So basically, and I know I'm going through a lot here, so if you get lost, don't be afraid to like go back and rewatch. But basically, we just broke down multiple things. This core, right, has the typing synergy of Dragon, Fairy, Steel in it, and has the makings of a strong Fire, Water, Grass core, right? And then what you're doing is now you're balancing out your physical and special attackers. You'll notice that I have 2 physical attackers and 2 special attackers. You might be like, okay, Joe, why is this important, right? So physical and special attacker balance, right? Why is this important, right? Why is this important? So the importance comes, right? The importance comes from not relying on one specific, let me also scroll this down a little bit. One specific offensive stat, as if you do this, you can have a substantial drawback / weakness versus certain moves, right? And basically, the reason why you have, weakness versus this is because your opponents can really exploit this weakness if you have like 3 physical attackers, 4 physical attackers, and no way to really stop it. Like you don't have a strong special attacker, right? So pretty much, the way I look at it is, let's say I have a team of Gyarados, right? Gyarados, Roaring Moon, Arcanine, Amoonguss, right? Let's say I have Scizor, right? And let's say I have, as my final choice, I wanted a physical fairy. So I picked a Zoomerl, right? What is the problem with this team? Basically, Amoonguss is my only special attacker. If there is even a chance of a double intimidate or just enough Will-O-Wisp connects on my team, I basically cannot touch the opponent, right? And that's a huge problem because that doesn't allow me to actually play the game the way I want to. It's too susceptible, right? Too susceptible to getting burned. And that's why you won't see teams like these used in competitive. Same thing in the other regard, right? So let's say I have a Flutter Mane, right? Flutter Mane, I have a Goldango, right? I have a, I'm just thinking of special attackers here. I'll actually just literally do this to make it easier to find them. I have a Chi-Yu, right? An Iron Moth, right? And then whatever other, right? Whatever else. You get the point, right? I am too susceptible to Light Screen or Snarl, right? And you can kind of see how that weakness would be there, right? And pretty much what you're trying to do with the team is give yourself as many options as possible to balance out these weaknesses so that you're not specifically weak to one thing and you have enough flexibility to play around the other thing. So this core, for example, if I'm playing versus an Intimidate Gyarados with Terra Blast Flying, I don't necessarily lose to it because I can cycle out my Ments with U-Turn. I have Flutter Mane here. I have Intimidate. I have Spore, and I have ways to position around both defensively and offensively, right? And I have ways to pressure the opponent that way. And I'm also using terrestrialization in a way that allows me to advance my offense and not necessarily have to waste a slot on a Pokemon to beat a certain thing, when I can change my Ments into something that can still reap the benefits of the Dark and Dragon coverage, but also deal with other Pokemon. I think that's where terrestrialization comes into play and results in really smart building, right? So pretty much, that's like all this energy in one core. And even better, what I'm going to do is now take you guys through the full thing that we just went over. Okay. So I just built this core, right? It has redirection, right? It has damage reduction with Arcanine. It has speed control with Flutter Mane. It's carrying Trick Room, so it can't get outpaced by opposing Tailwind teams, right? So you can punish them for clicking Tailwind on you, and you can reverse opposing Trick Rooms. Then you also have Amoonguss to passively deal with Trick Room, but I'll get to that later. Weather we don't have included yet. Again, this is a 4-mon core, right? So this is something that we would consider going into the next couple of slots. Pivoting, we do include U-turn, which allows us to pivot our Intimidators better and reset Regenerator. Spore, right? So Spore basically is our main option of disruption on the opponent, and we obviously have Protect. Protect is an important, kind of move to have. I'm going to continue when we get to the bottom of this team building guide again. But I just wanted to, obviously go through all the steps that we've gone through so far. Breakers. We have 2 strong breakers, Roaring Moon, Flutter Mane. What are their weaknesses? Their defense stats. So what do we have to compensate for that? Arcanine. Intimidate, Synergize as well. Both weak to steel types, both covered by Arcanine, right? And I'll probably be covered by another Pokemon we pick. Cores, right? We have a Fairy, Dragon, Steel core within our within our Flutter Mane and our Roaring Moon. And we're starting the makings of our Fire, Water, Grass core, right? So that's basically how you guys can see, that core coming together and why it would be strong, right? And this is kind of the factors that go into building, right? And like, even you could see this in like a lot of different ways that people will build. I'm going to close this out, by the way, because I don't like having this game open. It's very interesting. It creates like a lot of different ways you can kind of utilize teams, right? And you'll notice like some teams focus around setting up specific win conditions. So like Tatsugiri and Dondozo, there are teams that have Indeedee, right? And there are teams that have Goldango, for example, right? And what they'll do is they'll just focus on getting nasty plots up and winning, right? And that's kind of what they're aiming for. So you can kind of see the different ways that you can kind of build the team and kind of come across with that, and that how you implement those different ideas within the team, right? Now, I wanted to go over some rules of thumb that I usually utilize that allow me to like kind of have consistent teams regardless. So having at least 3 protects on a team is useful and allows you to pivot around the opponent better, scout turns, and also get a better idea of how they play, right? Protect is a really important move. You can use it to scout a lot of turns, see what opponents do. You can be incredibly aggressive if you really want to and not protect, but having the option there at least forces your opponent to rethink a lot of different things that they can do, right? And protect is just super useful for that reason. Next thing, right? Having a balance between bulky and frail Pokemon, right? If you have too many frail Pokemon and you don't have enough support, it can fail and it can cause you to have a 2-weak team. If you have too much bulky Pokemon that are supportive, you basically don't have enough offense. So usually I've found the good ratio is usually 2 supporters and 4 offensive options, right? And those can fit within whatever category, right? They have set up, breakers, kind of a mixed bag, even like an Intimidate support that can set up, like Gyarados, for example, but just something that's like a bit more aggressive, right? And that's kind of what factors in with this stuff. So as well too, I think that also highlighting that you want 2 terrestrial users, like specifically 2 Pokemon that really like using terrestrialization. So for example, right, again going back to this core, like Roaring Moon and Flutter Mane can both utilize their terrestrialization in a meaningful way that forwards the objective of this team, right? That allows it to do substantial damage and pressure the opponent. And the 2 terrestrializations that we're utilizing, we're going to build the rest of the team around supporting this so it can be as potent as possible and as threatening to the opponent as possible. And that's kind of the main goal there. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys in terms of that. So Final wrapping thoughts. This is just like more so like how you would think about the different factors that go in there. So I guess I'll take you through an example, right? I was gonna end the video here, but like because I don't want it to be too long and like be like super drawn out, but I will take you guys through an example of at least building like a offensive tailwind team. So let's take a core that we originally saw, right? That I was like, okay, this is cool. So let's take a not Chi Yu, sorry, Chen Pao, Garchomp, and Talonflame. Right now, what does this team struggle with? If you are caught in Trick Room, you can struggle, right? And sometimes you're going to want to redirect away from certain partners. So now I'm going to add Amoonguss. What does Amoonguss allow me to do? It gives me a better Trick Room answer. It counts as like basically its own speed control because it's so slow. It can spore a lot of Pokemon in Trick Room, right? Now, how do I continue to flesh it out from here where it's able to do enough? So I have a speed control Mon. I have a pretty decently bulky Mon in Garchomp, by the way. It's still pretty decently bulky. I have a fast offensive Mon in Shin Pao. This basically counts as my breaker. Technically, Garchomp does, but it also has a bit of bulk. Amoonguss is my support. So I have 2 supports right now, right? I have 2 attackers. I'm lacking special attackers, so I want to at least include 1 special attacker on my team. What's something that synergizes well with Garchomp and synergizes well with the kind of coverage it's aiming to go for? So ground, rock, dragon. Fairy coverage also allows me to really pressure opponents in that way, right? Now I can go for strong Dazzling Gleams to, pair together with Dragon Claw. I can go for strong Shadow Balls to chunk its switches that are trying to take other hits. This isn't obviously the only option, it's just more so an example. But basically, what I can also do is include Trick Room. That gives me another way to punish the opponent if they try and Trick Room on my team, right? It basically fleshes out the team idea to where I'm not just restricted into certain options to deal with stuff. And even though my team is typically more frail and offensive, I still have enough to compensate for whatever I'm going for with this team so that I don't just automatically lose if they set Trick Room on me. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. That's kind of the main idea that goes into these things and how you would factor and put these teams together. Hopefully this was a useful guide for you. I'd really like to hear your guys' feedback and if you guys enjoyed this. And again, super in-depth VGC content is always on Patreon. So if you guys are more interested in this stuff, learning more from me, this is where you can really access it the most, along with streams and everything else. Once again, guys, thank you so much for supporting the video. As always, I incredibly appreciate it. I'm looking forward to making more videos for you guys, and hopefully this was helpful. Once again, guys, thank you so much, and see you guys next video. Peace.